Kamen Kiva follows the story of Kamen Rider Kiva, Wataru Kurenai, and his deceased father, Otsuya Kurenai, across the time periods of 2008 and 1986, as they fight against a bunch of monsters made out of stained glass known as Fangires. Honestly, Kiva's a pretty decent show, to be honest with you. It's definitely not the best Kamen Rider show, but it's definitely a decent one in my book. I guess we should start with me talking about the story, or more over how I think they used the gimmick of the 2008 and 1986 timeline. Honestly, their use of this gimmick isn't the best. Like, it's not too bad, and allows the show to have a pretty unique feel, but throughout the show, it felt like they got more sloppy with the gimmick. Especially once we hit the 20s, where they stopped even using transitions for the time period. And then when Taiga got introduced into the 2008 timeline, they basically started to eclipse the 1986 stuff with the 2008 stuff, which again isn't terrible because the show was still fun to watch. And a lot of the cool stuff happened with the greater focus on 2008. But for like episodes at a time, the 1986 plotline moved at an entire snail pace, and it just started to bother me. Again, I really don't think it's done that badly, but I just wish it was kind of done better. Kind of like a lot of my problems with the show. But I guess it's time to get into the characters, which are in general Kiva's strongest aspect. Other than the banger soundtrack, which has no right to be as good as it is, and the fact that literally every suit in the show is amazing, from the writers to the Fangires. Honestly, Kiva might have the best suits in writer, definitely got the best soundtrack. Oh right, I was supposed to be talking about the characters. Wataru, or Kamen Kiva, while not being my favorite main writer, I think he's the one I relate to the most. Like, even though I like Gentaro, Sento, Toma, and Takeru more than him, I just can't find any of them as relatable as I do Wataru. Wataru starts off his journey as a super meek shut-in who only went outside to get materials for his violins, and his only friend was this, like, middle schooler who tried to make him more sociable, but eventually he did gain more friends, and came out of his shell more and more. And yeah, he did get hurt in making these connections, such as literally every Fanguy he became friends with died, including his girlfriend. But Wataru continued to move forward in life, despite these setbacks. And seeing someone go from a meek and timid dude to becoming a more confident person was awesome to see. Especially since he never truly loses the awkwardness, he just gets more confident with it. My favorite example of this, and the thing that solidified Wataru as a truly good character for me, was when he learned that he was actually half Fanguy himself, and became a shut-in due to not feeling like he belonged anywhere due to his dual nature. Until he eventually realized that being himself is more important than finding himself under labels of Fangire or human, which is so nice to see since a perfect culmination of the plot point of humans and Fangires can't coexist. To have the person who's literally both of those races decide that he'll go on a path not defined by either is great. I know some people find Wataru way too whiny or annoying, but to me he's an underrated goat of a protagonist. I might have used the word goated a little too early, because Nago, or Kamen Rider Iksa, is definitely a goat. He, like Wataru, also goes through a genuinely pretty cool development as a character. At first, Nago was a douchebag. He was still goated, but he was a douchebag. He was arrogant and overconfident to a T, always believing everything he did was right despite all the setbacks. That was until he went back in time and met Wataru's dad and mom, which made him realize that his issue was that he was too uptight about everything, and needed to loosen up a bit, which he did, and became a better person for it. Instead of the guy who was so stiff with his beliefs, he became more accepting of other ideas. A major example is how he started to treat Megami and Wataru after this. Nago eventually learns that Wataru is Kiva, and Nago is perfectly fine with it, even encouraging Wataru to tell the rest of their friend group about it, which is such a major character shift because at first, Nago hated Kiva with a passion, seeing him as a blight on humanity. Once he learned Wataru was Kiva, he with no hesitation dropped his hatred because of the fact that he could respect Wataru as being a good person. And then there's Megami, who he allowed to become Iksa, even willing to have her replace him after he loses his vision briefly. Something that he never would have done before. But aside from seeing him become a more humble guy being cool, he's just a genuinely funny character. Literally every bit of comedy done with him is just pure gold. Also, we're going to include Megami here too, since even though I like her, there's not enough to get an entire section of her, sadly. Episodes where she reflected on her mom's wishes and kills the Rook as Iksa, top tier though. Also, she's pretty funny, and her rivalry turned relationship with Nago was nice. The final section on the characters from 2008, and the ones about the characters who have the most issues with in general, outside the villains who suffer from the same problems. The first is Mio Suzuki, Wataru's girlfriend and the queen of the Fangire. Honestly, I'm a little mixed with her. Her relationship with Wataru is cute as they're both super shy. The whole queen plotline actually gave her some depth due to how much she hated the idea of having to kill Fangire for loving humans, to the point where she begs Wataru to kill Taiga, the king, in order for them to be together. My problem mostly comes in with her death. Like, I kinda like the idea that she felt guilty for attacking Taiga due to seeing that he really isn't that bad of a person and actually in love with her. But the way that they had her try to protect Taiga from Wataru felt a little wash as a scene. Especially when they try to retcon it to Bishop killing Mio, which kinda downplays Wataru's tragedy over her death. She's not a bad character, but her role in the story could have been executed better. Taiga Nobori, or Kamen Saga, and Dark Kiva, is the poster child of not a bad character, but the role in the story could have been executed better. He's genuinely super cool as a writer. His backstory of being Wataru's older half-brother and king of the Fangire is a decent driving conflict for the final part of the show, but everything about him is just more half-baked than it should be, mainly because he shows up so late as a character. For example, in the second to last episode, after Wataru beats him up and declares himself the new Fangire king, Taiga cries to his mom about feeling like everyone in his life leaves him, which isn't an entirely out of nowhere characteristic. It kind of puts into perspective how badly he tries to have Wataru join him after he learns that they're brothers, because he thought that a relationship like that would guarantee someone who wouldn't leave him. But since this comes from the second to last episode, it leaves his character falling a little flat. Not a bad character, definitely one who could have benefited from having more screen time to flesh him out. Our main protagonist from the 1986 plotline, and another goated character. At first he starts off as a womanizing douchebag. Over the time of the show, he becomes less of that and becomes a way more genuine person, and a hero that you can get behind. An example of this is his relationship with Yuri. At first, it's the most shallow thing in the world, but over the course of the show, it felt genuine that he actually cared about her above him just thinking that she's high. Even when he moves on to Wataru's mom, Maya, he still vows the relationship he had with Yuri, something he never would have done before. Also seeing how his relationship with Jiro changes from an intense rivalry to him entrusting his son's well-being to him was also cool. Also, just like Nago, he was super funny throughout. Both of Otia's love interests are straight up queens, one literally more than the other. Yuri is a tomboy who works for the Blue Sky organization in order to avenge her mother, who is also a member of the Blue Sky organization. The person she wants vengeance against is Rook of the Checkmate 4, which is our villain organization group. You know, kind of like they're based off of chess, that's where there's like King, Queen, Rook, Bishop, whatever. Honestly, she's a pretty fun character. Like her daughter, Megami, she kinda gets shafted later on, but the moments she got were pretty cool, such as when she defeated Rook as Ixa, or her goodbye to Otia, which is some of the saddest stuff I've seen in a while. Then there's Maya, the literal queen of the Fangire. She's also the greatest home run character to ever live. Her story was actually pretty interesting. The entire reason she even was interested in Otia was because as the Fangire queen, her purpose in that society is to kill all Fangires who love humans. But she became curious about why these people would fall in love with a human for the risks, so she met Otia and realized that she had a connection to the point where she loses her powers in order to be with him and have his child. So yeah, a pretty interesting character to be honest. We then have the final character of 1986, Jiro, and the rest of the armed monsters. All three of them are the last survivors of their race of Fangire, and will eventually become power-ups for Wataru. Jiro is the most important out of the three of them, even though Riki has some funny moments too. Jiro initially starts the show as the rival to Otia for Yuri's affection, mainly because he wants to use Yuri to repopulate his race, until he realizes that Yuri is in love with Otia, after Jiro goes way out of line with dragging this girl into the forest and begging her to love him. But Jiro is able to redeem himself by joining forces with Otia and Yuri to beat up Rook and becoming Wataru's guardian alongside his two friends. It was nice development to see. Also, he was just cool throughout with his demeanor. So I guess I'm done with the video. There are some other characters I could talk about, such as the villains, but most of them aren't worth talking about. In the end, Kamen Kiva is honestly the weirdest season of Kamen Rider I've ever watched, but that's kinda why I like it so much. Everything that makes it feel weird, while I can understand why others dislike it, or it just isn't for them, equals out to a pretty decent show for me. Like, I prefer all the other Rider shows I talked about way more than Kiva, but Kiva in itself is an unforgettable experience, for better or for worse. But like always, watch the show for yourself to get your own opinions on it, since with something like Kiva, it'll probably vary wildly. Also, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in another review.